Zoonotic viruses jump to humans. Here's why. Some explode into global pandemics like COVID.
Discover how they emerge and why some spread wildly.
Okay, let's unpack this. When you think about the origins of major disease outbreaks, those moments that really reshape society is what comes to mind. Chances are you're picturing something that started small, maybe somewhere unexpected, and then spiraled. Today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that. Zoonotic viruses. These are the diseases that jump from animals to humans. And they're responsible for some of the biggest health challenges we've faced, really. Our mission here is to explore the top 5 zoonotic viruses that health experts are watching very closely right now. We'll be using insights from cutting-edge research, recent reports, giving you a quick, thorough understanding, hopefully some aha moments, but, without feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is how often we kind of overlook the animal kingdom as the source, the primary source of human illness. It's not just what makes us sick, but how a pathogen actually makes that jump, that leap from one species to another. So this deep dive is really a journey into understanding how these new diseases emerge, how they spread from their animal homes, the reservoirs, and critically, why some just stay localized threats while others, well, like the one we all know too well, just explode into global pandemics. It's this complex mix of biology, environment, and maybe most importantly, human behavior.
That complexity is striking. And let's kick things off with a virus that has, well, a truly terrifying reputation. One you've definitely heard about in the news. Ebola. Remember those images, those headlines from past outbreaks. Ebola Virus Disease, it's a severe hemorrhagic fever, one of the deadliest pathogens known, right?
That's right. Ebola is a filovirus named for that distinct thread-like shape under the microscope, and it's marked by an incredibly high fatality rate. On average, it's around 50%. But in some outbreaks, that number has swung wildly, anywhere from 25% up to, frankly, staggering 90%. It first popped up, identified back in 1976. Caused numerous devastating outbreaks since then, mostly in Central and West Africa. The main animal reservoir, we think, is fruit bats. They seem to carry the virus without getting sick themselves, asymptomatically. And the spillover, that jump to humans. It typically happens through direct contact with infected wildlife, like bats, monkeys, apes, even forest antelope that people might find sick or dead.
Okay, so given how incredibly deadly Ebola is, it feels almost surprising it hasn't caused a global crisis, like, say, the flu or COVID. Why is its human-to-human spread relatively limited?
That is the crucial point and maybe the real aha moment here. Human-to-human transmission of Ebola is not airborne. That's key. It only happens through direct contact. We're talking blood, vomit, feces, other bodily fluids from someone who is actually showing symptoms.
So you have to be symptomatic to spread it?
Generally, yes. Significant transmission occurs from symptomatic individuals. This includes caring for sick people or, importantly, unsafe burial practices, which has been a huge challenge. Because it needs that close, direct contact with someone who's actively sick, its ability to spread widely in the general population is, well, quite limited compared to respiratory viruses. That characteristic is exactly what helps contain it, despite how lethal it is.
Huh. So in a way, its own deadliness kind of contains it because people get too sick too quickly to spread it far and wide before they're isolated or sadly pass away. What about some of the really big outbreaks then? The ones that made headlines?
Well, the most devastating one, the one that caused global alarm, was the West Africa epidemic from 2014 to 2016. That one had over 28,000 cases, more than 11,000 deaths across Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, just huge numbers. And then there was another significant one in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, from 2018 to 2020. That was about 3,500 cases, around 2,300 deaths. While we still see recurring outbreaks in parts of Africa, things have improved. Better surveillance, community education, and crucially, an effective vaccine for the Zaire Ebola species. These have all really helped control the spread. So yes, high fatality, but because it doesn't transmit easily through casual contact or the air, its global pandemic risk is seen as lower than, say, highly contagious respiratory viruses.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, for many of us, this next virus really brought that abstract threat of zoonoses right into our living rooms, SARS CoV-2. COVID-19. We're all incredibly familiar with this one, obviously. But let's dive into its zoonotic roots maybe a bit more. What was unique about its jump or its initial journey?
Right. SARS CoV-2, a novel coronavirus, emerged late 2019, caused the worst global outbreak in, well, a century. Its nature really set it apart. Horseshoe bats are thought to be the natural reservoir. It's very closely related to bat coronaviruses found there. But genomic studies suggest it might have passed through an intermediate animal host, maybe pangolins, maybe some other mammal.
An amplifier host, basically.
Exactly, before infecting humans, likely in a live animal market scenario.
And once it made that jump, it spread among humans.
Yeah.
That was the real game changer, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What was the absolute key factor in its rapid global takeover compared to these other high fatality viruses?
That is the key difference. After that initial spillover, likely in Wuhan, China, it established incredibly efficient human-to-human transmission. It spreads mainly through respiratory droplets, aerosols, coughing, sneezing, even just breathing. But here's the critical distinction, the thing that made it so hard to contain. People could transmit SARS-CoV-2 even without having symptoms.
Right, the asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic spread.
Precisely. That meant people were spreading it unknowingly, leading to its incredibly rapid worldwide spread and sustained community transmission on a scale we'd never really seen before with a new virus like this.
And the impact was just unprecedented in modern times.
Absolutely staggering. The global COVID-19 pandemic just swept the globe starting in 2020. The numbers are mind-boggling. Over 770 million confirmed infections, around 7 million confirmed deaths worldwide, and we know the excess mortality figures are likely much higher. Healthcare systems buckled everywhere. We saw massive public health measures, then waves driven by new variants, Alpha, Delta, Omicron, and so on. And while the WHO declared the emergency phase over in May 2023, and vaccines and prior infection have helped a lot, SARS-CoV-2 is still circulating, still evolving. It's basically an endemic human virus now, still has health impacts, and there's always that concern about new, potentially more dangerous variants emerging. It keeps adapting.
Okay, moving on to another coronavirus, but one with a very different story. MERS-CoV, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. How is its path distinct from COVID's?
MERS-CoV, yeah, first found in Saudi Arabia back in 2012. It also causes a severe respiratory illness. What's really notable about MERS is its high fatality rate, about 35% among the known cases, which is quite high.
35%? Wow.
It is. And the primary reservoir host, dromedary camels. Evidence suggests the virus actually spilled into camels from bats maybe decades ago, and you find it now in camel populations across the Middle East, Africa, and parts of South Asia.
So how do people usually get MERS then, and how is it spread between people, different from what we saw with COVID?
Typically, humans get infected through direct or indirect contact with infected camels. That could be handling them, drinking raw camel milk, eating undercooked camel meat. Now, once a person is infected, some limited human-to-human spread can happen, usually among very close family contacts or often in healthcare settings.
Ah, okay, so not easily in the general community.
Yeah, exactly. That's the crucial difference. MERS does not transmit easily person to person out in the community. Sustained chains of transmission are actually quite rare. Most of the larger outbreaks we've seen have actually occurred inside hospitals, often because cases weren't recognized quickly and infection control wasn't adequate. It presents a different kind of public health challenge.
So it's a deadly virus, definitely, but
yeah,
its social life, let's say, is much more restricted than COVID-19's was.
Precisely. Good way to put it. The initial 2012 outbreak in Saudi Arabia raised alarm, sure, but a really significant event was the 2015 outbreak in South Korea. A traveler came back from the Middle East, sparked an outbreak, 186 cases, 36 deaths. And that was only stopped with really aggressive quarantine measures. Overall, MERS has caused about 2,600 reported cases, maybe 950 deaths, across 27 countries since 2012, most of those in Saudi Arabia. These numbers are relatively low, really, because of that limited transmissibility. So MERS is still around, an ongoing but sporadic threat. We see dozens of cases most years, mainly in the Arabian Peninsula, mostly from camel exposure. The high fatality rate keeps it concerning, but the global risk is considered low if its transmission patterns stay the same. Still, the WHO keeps it on their priority pathogen list because, well, it could potentially mutate and spread more easily. That's the worry.
Right. Okay, let's turn to one that's maybe less known but incredibly lethal. Nipah virus. This one doesn't always grab the global headlines like Ebola or COVID, but it sounds terrifying in its own way. What's so chilling about it?
It truly is chilling. Nipah is a bat-borne paramyxovirus. That's the same family as measles and mumps, but Nipah causes severe illness, often encephalitis inflammation of the brain. And it's extremely lethal. Reported case fatality rates can range from 40% up to a really alarming 75% in different outbreaks.
75%.
Yeah. Fruit bats, specifically the big ones called flying foxes, genus Pteropus, they're the natural reservoir. They carry it, again, without apparent harm. Spillover happens when these bats shed the virus in saliva, urine, feces onto food sources or surfaces that humans or other animals then come into contact with.
So how does that actually translate into people getting infected? Are there specific habits or practices that put people at risk?
A very common, especially we've seen this in Bangladesh and India, is drinking fresh date palm sap.
Date palm sap, how does that work?
Well, the sap is collected, often overnight in pots. Bats are attracted to it, they lick the sap, and if they're shedding the virus, it contaminates the sap. People drink it raw, and that's the infection route. Also, remember the first big outbreak in Malaysia in '98? There, bats infected domestic pigs first. The pigs acted as an amplifier host, and then farmers got infected from the pigs.
Ah, an intermediate host again.
Exactly. And once a person is infected, human-to-human transmission is possible, usually through close contact with respiratory secretions or bodily fluids. Some outbreaks in Bangladesh have definitely involved person-to-person spread, often within families or in hospital settings. However, like Ebola, Nipah virus isn't considered highly contagious in its current form. You generally need prolonged close contact for it to spread between people.
Okay. What have been its most significant appearances, these outbreaks?
The first known one was that Malaysian outbreak, 1998-99. It caused encephalitis mainly in pig farmers. 265 people infected, 105 died, about 40% fatality. It was eventually contained by culling over 1 million pigs. Since 2001, though, we've seen almost yearly small outbreaks in Bangladesh and sometimes in India. These typically have very high mortality rates, sometimes over 70%. For example, there was an outbreak in Kerala, India in 2018. Small, 23 cases, but 17 deaths. Swift public health action managed to curb it relatively quickly. So Nipah is still pretty much confined to South and Southeast Asia, these sporadic outbreaks. But it's a huge concern for health authorities because, crucially, there's no vaccine and no specific treatment.
No vaccine, no treatment, and up to 75% fatality. That's a scary combination.
It is. And its ability to infect multiple species, plus that high fatality rate. It makes it a potential pandemic agent if it were to mutate to transmit more efficiently between people. That's the nightmare scenario. Right now, the risk is localized, mainly affecting communities near bat habitats or those consuming raw date palm sap. Outbreaks are usually small, often less than 50 cases. But the WHO classifies Nipah as a high priority for R&D, for surveillance, exactly because of that possibility of a more transmissible strain emerging down the line.
Okay, so that brings us to our last one. What does all this mean when we talk about a virus like H5N1, avian influenza? I mean, we hear flu, we think seasonal flu is something familiar, but this specific strain is different, isn't it? It poses a unique threat.
It absolutely is different. Highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1. It's a deadly flu virus, yes, but it primarily infects birds. It can, however, occasionally jump to humans. It first really got our attention back in Hong Kong in 1997, then reemerged in the early 2000s and spread rapidly in bird populations across Asia, Europe, Africa. Human cases of H5N1 are rare, thankfully, but when they do happen, they are often extremely severe. About 48% of the reported human cases have been fatal.
I mean, half.
Nearly half. Wild aquatic birds, like ducks and shorebirds, they're the natural reservoir for these influenza A viruses, including H5N1. The virus circulates in domestic poultry, like chickens and turkeys, and in wild birds, causing massive deadly outbreaks in bird populations. Right. And migratory birds carry it across continents.
And how do humans usually get infected? Is it like seasonal flu, spreading easily through the air?
No, and that's the crucial point again. Humans typically contract H5N1 through direct, close contact with infected birds or environments heavily contaminated with the virus. And think poultry droppings, contaminated cages, maybe during slaughter or defeathering. Most human cases have been among farm workers, people in live bird markets, or those handling sick or dead poultry at home. Critically, H5N1 does not transmit efficiently from human to human. That's the key limitation. We've only seen rare instances of probable person-to-person spread, usually among very close family contacts who had intense exposure. There's been no sustained community transmission.
Okay.
And it's this lack of easy human-to-human spread that has prevented H5N1 from causing a human pandemic so far, despite its presence in birds globally and its high fatality rate in the human cases we see.
So that limited human spread is a relief, definitely. But what keeps public health officials up at night about H5N1? What's the what-if scenario that's most concerning?
That's an excellent question, and it really is rooted in history and potential. Since 2003, H5N1 has caused these sporadic human cases or small clusters in over a dozen countries. As of roughly mid-2025, the WHO has recorded 986 human cases in 25 countries, with 473 deaths. That's that 48% fatality rate. Many cases occurred in clusters, like family members exposed to the same infected birds, but significantly without spreading further into the community. The big alarm bells rang around 2005, 2006 when H5N1 was just decimating bird populations across Asia and spreading into Europe and Africa. That led to a few hundred human cases over that period. More recently, there's been a massive ongoing avian epizootic, a widespread animal disease outbreak from around 2020 to 2023, affecting wild birds and poultry globally on an unprecedented scale. This has led to some isolated human infections, for instance, in places like Cambodia and China. But the historical context is what's truly sobering. Remember the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic?
Yeah, killed millions.
Exactly. Caused by an H1N1 influenza strain that likely originated in birds, adapted to humans, sickened maybe a third of the world's population, killed an estimated 50 million people. That shows the devastating pandemic potential if an avian flu virus does manage to fully adapt to efficient human-to-human transmission.
Right, so what's the current risk level for H5N1 then, given it's still very much out there in birds?
Well, the epizootic H5N1 is widespread in birds globally. So occasional human cases are unfortunately expected to continue occurring in people who have close exposure to infected poultry or wild birds. For the general public, the risk right now is considered low precisely because the virus hasn't gained that ability to spread easily between people. However, and this is the big however, every single human infection is basically an opportunity for the virus to mutate, to adapt better to mammals, including us.
A chance to roll the genetic dice.
Exactly. That's why surveillance is so intense, both in birds and in any human cases. Scientists, public health agencies, they remain incredibly vigilant because of H5N1's clear pandemic potential if it were to mutate or reassort and mix its genes with another flu virus into a form that spreads easily person to person. So right now, it's a major threat to agriculture and wildlife, and it remains a significant latent pandemic threat to humans. But human infections, thankfully, are still rare and generally contained.
Okay, so if we try to connect the dots across all these viruses, what's the big picture here?
I think if we connect this to the bigger picture, what really stands out across all five is that common thread, the animal reservoir and these spillover events. And these spillovers are almost always driven by our interaction with animals, whether it's through agriculture, hunting, wildlife markets, or just encroaching on habitats. And then we see that striking contrast you mentioned earlier, the different balances between transmissibility and fatality. You've got Ebola, MERS, Nipah, H5N1, typically high fatality, but relatively low human-to-human spread in their current forms.
Right, the ones that are terrifying but contained, mostly.
Exactly. And then you have SARS CoV-2 on the other end, lower fatality rate overall, but incredibly high transmissibility, which allowed it to cause a global catastrophe.
It really underscores the constant evolutionary pressure viruses are under, doesn't it? And the risk of mutation.
Absolutely. A single mutation, or a series of them, could potentially change everything. It could enable a highly lethal but currently localized threat like Nipah or H5N1 to suddenly gain efficient human-to-human spread. And that could potentially turn it into the next global pandemic agent. It really raises that crucial question, what can we learn from these patterns about our own vulnerabilities? And maybe more importantly, what does this tell us about preparing for what might come next?
Yeah, what stands out to you listening to this, for us, I think the relevance here, the application, is really understanding how interconnected everything is. Our world, our actions, the animal kingdom, it's all tied together in our collective health destiny. And it highlights the critical role of things like constant surveillance, rapid vaccine development, strong public health measures. These aren't just abstract concepts, they're essential tools for managing these ongoing threats and trying to prevent the next big one. We've gone on quite the deep dive today, really uncovering the fascinating and sometimes, frightening world of these zoonotic diseases. We've looked at 5 of the top viruses health experts are keeping a close eye on, from the sheer lethality of Ebola and Nipah to the pervasive global reach of SARS CoV-2. It seems to boil down to that critical balance, doesn't it, between how deadly a virus is and how easily it can actually spread person to person. That really defines its pandemic potential.
Exactly. And that's the thought I really want to leave you with today. Think about that delicate, almost precarious balance. A virus that's too deadly, paradoxically, might burn itself out. It might make its hosts too sick too quickly or kill them before they can effectively pass it on widely. Whereas one that's easily transmissible, maybe less severe initially, like SARS-CoV-2 proved to be, can just sweep across the globe and cause devastation through sheer numbers over time. But what if a virus emerged that managed to combine both? High lethality and efficient human-to-human transmission. Just ponder the implications of that scenario for a moment. It really underscores why ongoing research, global cooperation on surveillance, and robust preparedness are not just important, they're absolutely critical for facing whatever nature might throw our way next.